In December, I watched 36 movies. 8 of them were less than an hour, and one was a live show, but that's not the point. That's my record-breaking number for how many movies I've watched in a month, so let's get into the video. I started the Christmas season by watching the original West Side Story, because gangs singing and dancing makes for the best Christmas movie ever. Of course, I'm joking, this film is anything but a Christmas movie. I watched this to get myself prepared for Steven Spielberg's new translation of West Side Story, which I will hopefully be seeing soon. The first half of this was slightly off-putting for me, especially seeing these gangs sing and dance. It's not something you normally see, and it was definitely an ambitious move, but after a while I got used to it and I started to like it. I think there may have been a little too much dancing for my taste, even though it's a musical, because some songs seemed a little too long. That was hard to say. All of them, however, were great, and my favorites were America and Tonight. I'm not going to be listening to them in my free time, but they were still great. The way they incorporated the melodies of the songs into the instrumental score was also brilliant and worked amazingly. The first half was pretty lighthearted, but the second is more dark, intense, and emotional. The ending definitely kept my attention more by how they wrote plot points into the script. None of it really made me sad, but the very end was a really emotional moment. The build-up throughout also led to that amazing ending. It probably would have been more emotional if I had been more connected to the characters, but all of them looked fairly similar, so I kept getting them mixed up. That's not the film's problem though, it's mine. After rewatching it sometime in the future, I think I'll do better at remembering. The cinematography was stunning, and the way they utilized color was great. The sets kind of looked like a mix between a staged production set and a blockbuster set, and it worked really well, especially for this film. Overall, West Side Story is a great musical, and I'll hopefully catch the new one in theaters. Next, I saw Annie live on NBC. The acting was mostly good, same goes with the singing. Certainly impressive for a live show, but it wasn't always great. Sometimes it was a little pitchy, but I can live with it. It really dragged and did not need to be 3 hours long. The show itself was 2 hours, but the ads made it 3 hours, and that was certainly annoying. Even with the long runtime, it still brushed over certain things and didn't always make the most sense. The original movie is way better, but this was still kind of good. Also, I'm not the first to say this, but Harry Connick Jr. looked like Balloony from Phineas and Ferb. That bald cap, oh my gosh, I am traumatized. Then I watched the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid film on Disney+. I was actually pretty excited for this, but I just thought it was okay. I'm still mad it was less than an hour though, because it felt very rushed. The same day, I rewatched Curious George, A Very Monkey Christmas, and before you start writing a mean comment, please let me explain. This film is just too nostalgic for me to not like. Also, it has Monkey, and Monkey is king. I actually made a 50-slide presentation with one of my friends about why Monkey is better than human.
Top reason why Monkey better than human. Number 1, Monkey smart. Number 2, Monkey buys V-Bucks and parents not. Number 3, Monkey lower taxes. Number 4, Gorilla. Number 6, Benjamin Franklin.
The next day, I watched the original Miracle on 34th Street. Not quite as warm or magical as the 90s remake, though I would say I like them the same. John Hughes just adds a bit of flair to the story and makes it more heartwarming. This 1947 film, however, still has many great aspects about it. I really like most courtroom dramas, so the concept of this film was very interesting to me. Not all of it made sense, mostly just the fact that Santa Claus was in New York throughout all of December, but I can get past that just to have a good time. I definitely did. It was a very enjoyable film filled with joy and entertaining narrative elements. With all its affectionate charm, I did run into some problems. I think it's telling this story stupendously, but I think when it comes to a movie conveying the question, is Santa real, others do better. It also honestly has one of the most cliched messages in Christmas films, but it wasn't presented badly and it didn't feel contrived. Miracle on 34th Street is sentimental without overdoing it, making the entire third act predictable as you would expect. That doesn't matter, however, because of the buoyancy surrounding the picture. It reaches most of all the boundaries that were necessary for it to be considered as a Christmas classic, and I would easily say it is. After that, I rewatched The Santa Claus. It was my third watch, and it's still really good. It doesn't hold up nearly as well as other Christmas classics, but it still manages to instill a festive feeling with the classic Christmas songs and seasonal original score. The greatest thing about this movie is clearly Tim Allen. He crushes the role as Santa Claus, and his wit really works for the type of Santa he's playing. They sometimes go for some lowbrow slapstick humor, which is hit or miss, but the comedic lines of dialogue were really well done. A lot of the comedy is very strong, and I'm glad that it was. What really works is the well-balanced and sublime screenplay. It captures the spirit of the holidays and balances that with family drama. The story is fleshed out and developed well, but also enjoyable for little kids. I do have a strong hatred for a couple things about this film. The effects are horrendous. I get that it came out in the 90s, but I am not using that as an excuse to let it go. They just look so bad, and I don't care if it came out a while ago. Also, the divorce custody proceedings feel forced and kind of rushed. I did not like that. The horrible sequels to this have made me sour on this film a little bit since I saw it last year, but it's still a charming family film that's smarter than you would think. Except it isn't smart when Scott Calvin kills Santa, then steals his clothes, identity, job, and then leaves his family, job, friends, and old life behind. And then none of the dead man's friends or employees seem to care that he is dead. Nice job, Disney. The same day, I rewatched the 1966 How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This movie is about a green hairy guy with an antisocial personality disorder and depressed mood that tries to make kids suffer by stealing their valuables. Happy holidays, everyone. How is this for kids? Next, I rewatched Gremlins. This is a Christmas movie. Fight me. I'll win. I've realized this has major pacing issues and really dumb characters, but besides that, it's still pretty good. I talk about this film more in a video I made last year that you can check out if you want. My thoughts aren't quite up to date, but still, I want watch time. Then I rewatched Jungle? Am I dying? Jingle All the Way is a movie that I know is bad, but I have tons of fun with it, so I can't give it a bad score. Everything, including the plot, acting, script, and special effects, are incredibly cheesy, but everything is entertaining. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sinbad are terrible, but somehow they make it so cheesy they trick us into liking their performances. It's weird. That's basically all I have to say, but I have to ask. Does anyone else think it's funny that Turbo Man was the governor of California? The next day, I rewatched Scrooged. What makes Scrooge stand out among other countless adaptations of A Christmas Carol is how it puts a spin on the story. It makes it somewhat original and unique, and I appreciate that about it. It's not copy and paste from the book by Charles Dickens, but it has many new plotlines and a lot of different characters. None of the characters from the book are in this. There are actually different versions of them that aren't quite the same. It's a bit more unpredictable, and it's nice to see a new take on the story. Bill Murray gives one of my favorite performances of his as Frank Cross, just behind his performance in Ghostbusters. He plays him pretty well, and he sells the transformation of his personality, even though it seems rushed in the script. My rating for this film has gone down a lot since I last saw it, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's a fun Christmas movie, but also one that annoys me sometimes. Looking at you, Ghost of Christmas Present. After that, I rewatched The Muppet Christmas Carol. This is easily my favorite adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's exactly what you would think this story would look like if it was told by a Muppet and starring Muppets. It's all executed perfectly, I dare say. It's near perfection. I'd say my only flaws are that the CGI isn't the best, Scrooge doesn't seem hateable enough at the beginning, and the songs aren't memorable. The Ghost of Christmas Past looks terrifying, to be honest, and looks like it was pulled from a horror movie because of that CGI. Almost everyone in the film rejoiced when Scrooge died during the Ghost of Christmas Future segment, and that just seems too harsh. I wouldn't say the songs are bad, they're just not that good. Other than that, this film is practically perfect. The way it portrays the spirits is simply genius. I don't know what makes it so special. There's just something about the cinematography and set design that makes the spirits either scary or jolly. The Ghost of Christmas Present is a jolly, likable spirit, and The Ghost of Christmas Future is very scary, especially for a film like this. And for some reason, this time watching, I got a little emotional for the plotline about Tiny Tim. He's always seemed cute, but this time hearing about his death was incredibly sad. Mostly when Bob Cratchit says he put his grave by the pond so he could see the ducks, that just made me feel so sad. I undeniably think that this is one of the best Christmas movies ever made. Please watch it if you haven't seen it. It's the perfect adaptation of the great book that I read half of last month. Yeah. Next I saw Where the Red Fern Grows. My English class watched this film over a week after reading the book. It feels cheaply made and rushes things over to make it less than 1 hour and 40 minutes. I get that they didn't have the greatest technology to make this film in the 70s, but it still feels older than it is. If it was made today, they probably would have made the dogs CGI like they did in The Call of the Wild. It looks a lot better with real dogs, though the camera work still makes it look bad. I can see how some people might like this, but it's just not for me. Then I rewatched Frosty the Snowman. Just a harmless Christmas classic. It isn't saying much, but it's iconic. I wouldn't say it's too memorable compared to other Christmas films, but it's pretty good. Kind of gets worse every year though, not gonna lie. The same day, I also rewatched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It doesn't necessarily hold up very well, but it's a darn good film. It definitely does overdo it with certain things, but I just love it. Unforgettable film for me, and one that I've seen countless times. Every song, character, and plot point sticks with me, and it will stay an annual viewing. A couple days later, I rewatched The Star. The Star is as formulaic and uninspired this incredible story can get. I haven't seen many other films telling this story, but this one is probably the worst. Even someone who didn't know this narrative by heart would find this incredibly predictable, but by playing it this safe, it isn't too bad. Nothing in here is outstandingly bad, it's all just kind of fine and harmless. The biblical nature of the story justifies most of the linearity and makes it a lot more interesting. Every Bible story has inherent power any way you tell it, even if it's about a talking donkey. You can clearly tell that Sony didn't hire top-tier animators for this film. The designs are so basic, plain, forgettable, and I really wished Sony trusted this film more to hire better animators. Sony did thankfully trust it enough to recruit some solid voice actors for this film. I really liked Keegan-Michael Key in this, even though he was a side character, and the rest of the cast did pretty well. Not a great film by any means, but it would be great for little kids who like talking animals and Christmas. You could spend an hour and a half a lot worse, trust me. Then on the 14th, I rewatched Diary of a Wimpy Kid from 2010 after I saw the new one. If you haven't seen my ranking, then watch it. Also on the 14th, I watched It's a Wonderful Life for the first time. In many ways, I am glad I waited to watch this film until now. Any other year, I probably would have disliked it, then forced myself to give it a great score because of the peer pressure. But after this year, the year I truly got into most of all types of film, I loved It's a Wonderful Life. It has such a strong opening that made me fall in love with the characters, and an incredible ending that made me realize why I fell in love with them. The middle slowed down a bit to dive into George Bailey's character, which made him go from likable to some sort of Scrooge, then to likable. I compare George Bailey to Ebenezer Scrooge because they both go through a transformation in personality. Scrooge had the visitation by three spirits, and George had a guardian angel to help him through his troubles. I think the way they introduced his guardian angel, Clarence, possibly the best way you could imagine. At the beginning of the film, we see George jump into a lake to save his brother. At the end, we see him jump into a river to save Clarence. It's a subtle character arc and made the scene where Clarence is introduced even better. It's a Wonderful Life is one of my new favorite holiday films. Ever since I saw it, I've been thinking about it more and more and more. It's a must-see Christmas classic and one that will undoubtedly be regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. Not one of my favorites, but I love it. Next, I rewatched Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Arguably just as good as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I know I've said multiple times that I'm not a big fan of movies that write their own origin for Santa, but for some reason, I love this. It's such a charming and magical film that I think is easily in the top tier of Rankin Bass Christmas specials. And on the same day, I rewatched Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. This is one of the funniest Christmas films and the funniest Muppet movie with no intention to be of the sort. So many moments in this film are hilarious even when they weren't even trying to be. Part of that is just how undeniably cute the characters are, but it also has some depth to the storyline. It touches upon death, and is also kind of an homage to the gift of the Magi. To compete in the contest, Emmett and his mother have to sacrifice something important to each other. It's just a funny, cute Muppet special that deserves a lot more love. After that, I rewatched A Christmas Story. Don't you just love the out-of-tune 80s Christmas music, the cheesy yet surreal plot points, and the memorable scenes in A Christmas Story? This film feels almost less like a feature-length film and more of an anthology, but it still works really well. It does a great job of appealing to all ages. I know for sure that some adults, children, teenagers, and even some older folks love this movie. It has something for everyone. Of course, it's aiming more to kids because of the main character Ralphie, but it also has a realistic mother, father, and toddler. The amount of iconic scenes and lines in this film is almost unmatched. You've got the leg lamp, the tongue stuck to a pole, the soap in the mouth, the Easter bunny suit as a Christmas present, the Chinese restaurant for Christmas lunch, and a 9-year-old wanting an official Red Ryder carbine action 200-shot range model air rifle. There's also lines such as, "You'll shoot your eye out, kid," that have become classic lines in Christmas cinema. If I had to say one gripe I have with this film, I would say that I wasn't a fan of all of the fantasies or dreams Ralphie has during this film. I guess I wasn't a big fan of the characters Scut Farkus and his friend. Other than that, I love this film. Definitely a staple in the holiday season. One that's great enough for me to own and watch every year. Then while I was on my way to see Spider-Man No Way Home, I rewatched It's Christmas Time Again, Charlie Brown. Not bad, but not nearly as good as A Charlie Brown Christmas. It has a few good jokes and lines, but really it's just a forgettable TV episode. It kind of feels like a bunch of different shorts put together to make somewhat of a sequel to the original Charlie Brown Christmas film. Then in the theater, I saw Spider-Man No Way Home, and you guys already know what I think of it. I've already talked about it in 2 videos. Since my review, I've lowered my score to a 9 out of 10, but that could change once again when I rewatch it. Next, I rewatched National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Well, it seems like I like this film less each time I rewatch it. Of course, I still gotta love it, but I just notice more problems with each viewing. That's the bad thing about rewatching films, but the good thing is that you can notice new good things. I didn't notice very many good things about this film that I didn't before, but yeah, I still love it. There's something about the simplicity of the story that's so entertaining. It's so ridiculous and pure joy from start to finish. We don't get very many films like this anymore, where the actors, especially Chevy Chase, have the funniest delivery and facial expressions. Chevy Chase's performance is masterful, but to make it funny, the script has to be good. Thankfully, the comedic writing is stellar. The slapstick is predictable, but some of the dialogue is unexpected and hilarious. For example, the dinner scene where the grandma says the Pledge of Allegiance as a prayer. There are many characters that I don't like, and there are sure some jokes that don't land, but I love this film and always will, thanks to its hilarious and great cast of mostly good characters. On the 19th, I rewatched The Polar Express. One of my favorite holiday traditions is to drive around town looking at Christmas lights, and then come home and watch Polar Express while drinking hot cocoa during the hot chocolate scene. Just a really fun tradition, and lets me look past some of the bad things about this film. It's a film that gets a lot of hate, but I can cut it some slack because of my tradition, and the way it encapsulates that feeling and the spirit that fills the air at this time of year. It gives off a warm, fuzzy feeling like no other Christmas film. I understand the complaints many people have with this, and they are completely valid. It can sometimes be too melodramatic, but I have to say, that also adds to the feeling you get watching this film. The animation does look rather frightening, however. The aesthetic, atmosphere, and background design of the film is gorgeous. but there's something about the way the characters look, especially the elves, that is off-putting. The motion capture is certainly impressive, but it's just the character design that bothers me. Even with the atrocious character design, the marvelous voice acting to accompany it mostly makes up for it. The voices of Tom Hanks, Josh Hutcherson, and Daryl Sabara were brilliant for the film. There's not really a weak link in the cast, except for the know-it-all kid who was really annoying. The score by Alan Silvestri is magical and filled with wonder. A lot of the exciting or emotional moments wouldn't have worked as well without this remarkable piece of work. A weaker soundtrack would make this film a lot worse, honestly. That just shows how important a good score is. My biggest personal flaw with this is the elves. They don't act like I think they should have. They're cocky, annoying, and even mean. Doesn't make sense to me why they had Boston accents either. Strange. The Polar Express is a very divisive film. You either love it or you hate it. I, for one, love it, and I think it's close to the top tier of Christmas films. At school, I watched the 2018 version of The Grinch, an unnecessary remake of a remake, but it's fun. Benedict Cumberbatch's performance feels unenergetic for the Grinch and not mean enough, but he's okay and gives a fine performance for the film. The Grinch's redemption feels rushed, and the pop and rap music can definitely get annoying, but it's harmless family entertainment. One of the better Illumination films. Then I rewatched Home Alone. Just a masterpiece. I gotta watch it every year or my Christmas is incomplete. Basically the most fun movie I've ever seen. Check out my Home Alone ranking in the iCard. After that, I rewatched Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Literally the most violent film ever made, and I'm not joking. On the 23rd, I rewatched Elf. Seeing Will Ferrell act like a child in tights shouldn't be this good. Then on Christmas Day, I watched Die Hard. I never realized how many rip-offs of Die Hard were released after the success of that film. Even a film as silly as Paul Blart Mall Cop takes ideas from this film. I see why though. Die Hard is an action movie at its finest. The entire film has incredible action and some of the most memorable lines of dialogue I've ever heard. The action starts very early on and gets better and better with time. Bruce Willis's performance is outstanding, and the late Alan Rickman did a great job as well. Some of it is even pretty funny. The pacing was remarkable, and the balance of multiple tones was handled in a very good way. There was an abundance of suspense and tension in this film. I was occasionally on the edge of my seat, even though I wouldn't say that it crosses into the thriller genre. It got a little bit too long towards the end, but other than that, I'd say this is basically flawless. One of the best action flicks I've ever seen, and one of my new favorite Christmas films. Also on Christmas Day, I watched Malignant, because just like West Side Story, this is the best Christmas movie ever made. No, it's not. Wait, actually, there was one scene in this that did have a Christmas tree. When I first heard about the concept of Malignant, I was fascinated. I thought that having an imaginary friend of sorts come to life was a great idea for a horror movie, but I feel like this was missing something. Or it was trying to do too much. I can't really say I was a fan of how she had a parasitic twin inside of her, and that just made the film seem too demonic, or something of the sort. James Wan definitely did a great job directing, and I would say that the cast did a pretty good job. The cinematography was surprisingly amazing, and had some really unique shots and camera angles. Coming off of Insidious, Furious 7, and Aquaman, I was slightly disappointed by this film, but it is by no means a bad horror film. Then I watched Encanto. I gotta be honest, I wasn't too excited for this. I thought it had a pretty good storyline, but not one I thought I would resonate with or like very much. However, I was wrong, and I very much enjoyed this film. I wouldn't say it's amazing at all, but it does have some pretty great ideas. All of them aren't executed in the best way possible, but there are some really good things about this film. It's a given that the animation was stunning, but the colors used were very appealing. The voice acting was standard, and the singing was decent. The songs, however, weren't the best, and Lin-Manuel Miranda has and can do a lot better with his music. I'm very surprised that this film came onto Disney Plus so quickly, meaning less than 45 days after the initial release, but I'm very happy that it did so I could watch it this soon. Pleasant surprise, but not fantastic. On the 27th, I watched Teen Beach Movie. I was slightly interested in seeing Teen Beach Movie only because it was a spoof of West Side Story, and I really loved that film. But I guess I shouldn't have had as high of hopes as I did, because I did not like this film. As a Disney Channel original movie, I guess it's okay, but this is just not my type of thing anymore. I used to love Disney Channel stuff like this, but not at all anymore. I think my least favorite thing about this film is how cheesy it is. It's a given that a movie like this would be cheesy, but it was really cheesy and the dialogue was awful. The acting was really bad, but I don't think I'd blame the cast. I think it just comes down to the horrible directing and even worse script. The actors did the best they could for this film, which didn't end up being good because the script set the bar so low. I think I would enjoy this more if it was more like West Side Story than creating its own thing. Not to say it wasn't enjoyable, it was definitely entertaining, and it passed the time for me while I was in the car. I like that they established that there's a movie called Wet Side Story in this universe, which is supposed to be the same film but set on a beach, but since it's Disney Channel, they just had to throw in random plot lines about a scientist trying to make a machine to change the weather. It would have been a lot more interesting if it had the same plot as its source material, but since it was aimed towards kids, they changed it to not be as serious. I see why they did that, but it could have been so much better if they just trusted their source material. On the 28th, I watched Alfred Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief. To Catch a Thief wasn't my first choice for my next Alfred Hitchcock film to see, but I figured since it was on Amazon Prime, why not? I think I enjoyed it more than North by Northwest, but it's a lot more forgettable, so at the moment it's my least favorite Hitchcock picture. But of course, it's still pretty good because he is one of the greatest filmmakers ever. Cary Grant and Grace Kelly were great, as they always are in Hitchcock films. Hitchcock is one of those directors that seems to cast a lot of the same people in several of his films, and I'd say that it works. Like I said, both Cary Grant and Grace Kelly did very well, but their performances weren't their very best. The suspense in the film didn't set the bar too high, but there were some good scenes involving robberies and whatnot. Without the great performances, however, those scenes wouldn't have been as good. I especially loved the cinematography and lighting. The crew did something very interesting by making the night scenes have green lighting, and it looked really good. There was also one shot in the middle of the film that consisted of two characters. One was lit green and the other was lit purple, and there were pink and red fireworks in the background. It looked beautiful, and while this film doesn't have as great of cinematography as Vertigo does, it's still some of Hitchcock's best. While this isn't the best Hitchcock film, I wouldn't call it the worst. It's my least favorite, but it's still a well-made film. After that, I watched The Suicide Squad. I'm honestly surprised they did such a good job with their DC movies this year. After a bunch of train wrecks, this year they made some of the best comic book films of the year. One of the biggest detriments of the DCU was the studio interference, but thankfully with this film you can easily tell that the final product was James Gunn's full vision. It doesn't feel like a studio-made film, it feels like it was made by a director that was passionate about the story and characters. James Gunn was the perfect choice to direct this, especially with how amazing Guardians of the Galaxy was and how similar the films are. They are both about a group of superheroes or anti-superheroes that teamed up to fight against a threat. He made both the films hilarious but unique and let them stand out amongst the hundreds of other superhero movies. On paper, the characters seem very silly, even for a comic book movie, and especially for a film that's rated R, targeted towards adults. Polka Dot Man, King Shark, and Weasel all sound like they belong in a children's film, but having them in this honestly makes it really funny. There were so many opportunities for jokes, and they took about every single one of them. Most of the jokes were pretty funny. There were a couple that weren't, but that's not a big problem because that's what it's like with every comedy. The film even made me care about characters such as Polka Dot Man, and that sounds like it would be a really hard thing to do. The biggest problems I have with this is that it feels the need to be edgy, and the pacing was kind of off. It had a lot of violence and language, and all of that felt tacked on. It's filled with style for sure, but the unearned edginess and inconsistent pacing kind of take it back a couple notches. The plotline about Harley Quinn also didn't really feel like it needed to be as big as it was, and I wish that it was shortened, something different, or taken out completely. I love that this film is unlike a lot of other superhero films I've seen, but just like every other, it's filled with flaws. It's in my top 10 of 2021 so far, and I hope that it stays there like it truly deserves. The next day, I watched Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up is one of the most divisive films of the year, and fortunately, I really liked the film. It never quite came together as I wished it would, but I don't think it's a train wreck like some people do. I'd say it has the best cast of the entire year, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep, Jonah Hill, Timothée Chalamet, Ariana Grande, Cate Blanchett, and Tyler Perry. Just an astonishing cast, and they all grabbed my attention in the best way possible. I wasn't a fan of how DiCaprio's character was written, but his performance was still very good as always. I was also incredibly frustrated by the way the role of the president was treated. She was the only female president, and they wrote her as an arrogant person that doesn't care about anyone. While the performances are amazing, Adam McKay's directing felt somewhat unfocused. The plot itself intrigues me, but the way the story focuses on some other random storylines was strange. I love the way the film tackles social commentary, and even though the film is mostly satirical, the relevancy of everything happening is scarily accurate. It seems like the government definitely would react to this occurrence in real life the same way they did in this film. It handles these extreme circumstances with care, and it's a great play on our society. It kind of reminds me of how the pandemic was treated over the last couple years. It's mostly a political satire done right, even with its pacing issues, bad subplots, and uncomfortable tonal shifts. There was one cameo towards the end that did have me laughing, but that was about it for laughs. It wasn't really all that funny, but to make up for it, it did showcase some emotion. If you've seen this, then you know the moment I'm talking about. Some of the jokes didn't work because of their really bad editing too. A lot of it works so well, and I wish that it was doing better with critics. I wouldn't be surprised if this film got nominated for some awards from the Academy, and it might even win some. And you know what? I wouldn't be complaining. I thought that Don't Look Up was a great film on the state of the world and humanity. The last film I watched in 2021 was Ron's Gone Wrong. Ron's Gone Wrong very much has a 3-act structure. The first act is a tale of friendship, the second is survival, and the third is a heist. It's really strange, and the pacing was really distracting. All of the believability of the first act quickly vanished within a couple minutes, and that made me not like it quite as much. With all of that said, I still really liked the film and thought that it was relatable, fun, enjoyable, and even a little bit emotional. Not one of the greatest films of 2021, but surely not one of the worst. This movie thinks it's an original comedy, but while watching, I noticed a lot of similarities between this and Big Hero 6. They're both films about a kid who meets a new technological friend, and the things that Barney and Ron go through, especially towards the end, are incredibly similar to what Hero and Baymax go through in Big Hero 6. I can't tell if this film knew that it was copying Big Hero 6, but it definitely did. The voice acting in this was really good. While watching the credits, I surprisingly recognized a lot of names of the smaller cast members, such as Ricardo Hurtado, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but her, and Justice Smith. Jack Dylan Grazer did a great job in their lead role, and I'm actually pretty excited to see what he will do in the future. The writers did some very weird things with how this film was supposed to come together, but despite that, I had a great time, and I do recommend it to general audiences. I believe cinephiles like me won't fully love it, but they will have a good time just like me. But that's what I watched in December. And before I end this video, I just wanted to let you all know that this was my last What I Watched This Month video. Making these videos has just become a chore for me, and they're not nearly as fun as they used to be. On top of that, they're just not getting the same traction that they used to in months like February and April. By discontinuing this series, I hope to make bigger and better videos for you all. But if you really want to know what I'm watching day by day each month, I suggest to you to go follow my Letterboxd account, where I review every movie I watch in a certain month, as well as keep a list of every movie I did watch in said month. But until then, stay tuned and subscribe to Cinema Ranks.